For more on this story now, let's go to Beirut and the Wall Street Journal's Maria Abi Habib. Thank you for joining us here on France 24. That compromise deal to end the hostilities, will it hold after the murder of Mohammed Abdel Malik al-Mutawakkil?
Well, at this point, it's kind of really anybody's game in Yemen. The Houthis took over Sana'a in September because they said that, frankly, there was no central government to really implement law and order. So if they really feel that that Mr. Mutawakkil was central, and that assassinations continue, because this is really the first large-scale, assassination of a prominent figure since the September escalation with the Houthis taking over the capital. If these assassinations continue, then this might actually just force the Houthis into withdrawing their support for a government that's supposed to be formed this week.
All right, and the timing of all of this, it's playing out, the funeral, that is, on the Muslim holy day of Ashura. It's of particular significance to Shiites. The Sunni-Shiite rift, you penned a piece in the Wall Street Journal this Tuesday where you talked about how this goes well beyond Yemen, what's going on there in Sana'a.
That's very true. I mean, the Houthis are seen to be close to Iran because they represent the Zaydi sect of Shia Islam, which is an offshoot of Shia Islam. There have been multiple reports of Iranians sending weapons shipments and cash that have been intercepted off of the coast of Yemen that were destined to Houthi territories. The Houthis in private, when I went and visited and did extensive reporting in Yemen last year, Houthi leaders are telling me in private that, yes, they actually have received some training from both Hezbollah and from Iran, but they were saying that it's more just, we'll take what we can get, and at the end of the day, this government has been discriminating against us as Zaydi Muslims, and, Sana'a is controlled by Sunnis. But this is very, very, humiliating for Saudi Arabia, which has propped up Yemen with a lot of money and military support against Houthis even in 2009. And it's very embarrassing for Saudi Arabia to see that the government that they've propped up with billions of dollars has fallen quite swiftly to the Houthi rebels. This is coming after, multiple Sunni governments, either seeing their political fortunes wane, such as in Baghdad with the fall of Saddam Hussein, or in Beirut here with the Future movement here, seeing their political power, taken quite a bit by Hezbollah.
All right, so this putting the Saudis on the defensive. And let me ask you, Maria, because we saw in that report that those who are against the Houthis, well, it's a mix of Sunni tribes and Al-Qaeda. How much support is Al-Qaeda getting from abroad, and from who?
That's the, multi-million-dollar question. At this point, when I speak to U.S. officials who are looking at Al-Qaeda, or Western officials, they're saying that, basically Al-Qaeda, the seed fund, like the wealthy Gulf private donors that were once, filling the coffers of Al-Qaeda, are now kind of just, very minuscule in terms of what actually funds the group. What funds the group is more kidnap and ransom, especially of European hostages, such as, French and Spanish hostages, because those governments pay, and also extortion rackets, and basically forcing shops to pay, a monthly protection fee.
And with, as you just described, Saudi Arabia on the back foot, where is Saudi Arabia putting its money?
Where is it putting its money on the fight against Al-Qaeda? I mean, they have supported... Oh, in Yemen? I mean, basically, the Saudis have propped up the government in Sana'a to the tune of over $2 billion, it seems. As recently as May, they had actually announced a $1 billion loan to the government of Sana'a. And there's also a counterintelligence unit in Sana'a where basically Saudi and U.S. officials and Yemeni all, pull their intelligence about Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and look at where to strike them, and basically just trying to do damage control when it comes to Al-Qaeda and their actions in Yemen, because at the end of the day, it's a very long and porous border that Yemen shares with Saudi Arabia. So whatever happens in Yemen will have a direct result in Saudi Arabia eventually.
All right, so the way you're describing it, for the Saudis, Al-Qaeda and the Houthi rebels are enemies. Are they enemies on the same scale?
Yes, for sure. Al-Qaeda basically said that they were going to ramp up attacks on the Houthis as soon as the Houthis took over Sana'a in September, and we've seen those attacks increase. For instance, in September alone, there was something like 16 attacks that Al-Qaeda had actually taken responsibility for across Yemen that killed about 101 mostly civilians, and those were targeted mostly at the Houthis. And that's a statistic for Maplecroft, which is a global terrorist analyst network. So they have ramped up attacks, and especially in Sana'a, the capital, because they weren't as strong in the capital as they have been in the rural areas. But the destabilization of the Houthi, of the government that the Houthis have contributed to, and the strain on security forces, Yemeni security forces that the Houthi militants have created, have basically allowed Al-Qaeda this vacuum of power in which to foment chaos.
A vacuum of power that they've occupied. Maria Abi Habib, let me ask you, you mentioned a moment ago drone attacks overnight, the U.S. conducting a new one, at least, according to Washington, at least 20 suspected al-Qaeda militants killed. How do ordinary Yemenis feel about this?
Well, you're hitting all the hot button topics here in this interview. Ordinary Yemenis really hate it, mostly. They've grown to hate it. Those who actually might have supported it because they didn't support Al-Qaeda and saw this as maybe the only way to really keep these militants at bay, have grown to feel that the drone attacks actually haven't really helped much to thwarting Al-Qaeda. At the end of the day, what's happened in Yemen, you speak to Western officials and they say, well, without the drone attacks, this would have happened, 3 years ago. What we're seeing in Yemen, this complete destabilization, would have happened 3 years ago. But at the end of the day, if you're staving off the problem just by a few years, you're not really solving the problem. And it's a very different counterinsurgency method than what they were actually doing in Afghanistan, for instance, which is, in Afghanistan, such airstrikes were paired with a very aggressive multi-billion-dollar program to actually build a state. Whereas in the U.S., the Americans haven't built a state. What they've done is they've just, targeted militants from the skies.
All right, so the feeling that there needs to be more of a plan when it comes to helping Yemen in its transition. I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Maria Abi Habib, for being with us today from Beirut, Lebanon.